Hi, I'm Thomas. I am at Vercel. For those of you who don't know what Vercel is, basically it's like the Squarespace, but for people who do a little more JavaScript to deploy your website. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I got into data actually as a teacher. I realized, I was scoring tests and giving students feedback. But one of the things I realized was I didn't actually understand, if you went from like a 40% one test and then to a 70% on your next test, that's a lot of growth, but it still wasn't a great grade, right? But it was measuring the growth, and I was like, oh man, I should quantify this. So that was kind of my first experience of really understanding data. So at Vercel, I work on a lot of metrics, primarily product metrics. So that's what I'll be talking about today, is building out product metrics. So the data experience at Vercel before we started was like the worst side of self-serve you can possibly do. It was like you had to self-serve to get data. It's like where you don't want people to be. They were jumping into the database on every table, and it just was chaos. Once we started the team, we were putting out fires pretty regularly in the beginning, but our philosophy was we don't solve data problems, we build data systems. So we've really, really leaned into that, and this is one of the products that we have built. So within the first year, we were able to kind of set up some of our systems, people to rely on, putting things behind Git, building out standard dashboards, and moving past the first year has been really exciting. We have added streaming architecture to allow teams to more easily get data into the warehouse. So some of the problems that we dealt with, and if any of you all have experienced any of these, feel free to raise your hand or shake your head. Bespoke data pipelines from engineering teams, custom metrics that don't necessarily measure what people think they're measuring. Anybody experienced that one? Yeah, I think one day someone's like, our weekly metric dropped. I'm like, that's only 6 days. How is that possibly a weekly metric? So the other one is timeframes. Like, what is a monthly metric? Is it 31 days? Is it just a month? Is it 4 weeks? What are we even talking about? I mean, missing random documentation. Tracking someone down to understand what's going on was really hard. Zero SQL standards. I mean, people were writing CTEs. Some people were writing nested queries. It was really hard for people to share queries with each other. And then there was literally no concept of a dashboarding experience. It was all over the place. So those are things that we really struggled with. So some of the victories we had were standardizing and version controlling our pipelines. We were like, oh, we don't have metrics. So let's start at the company level, because everyone works at the company, and let's build metrics and let's cascade them down, because at least the company metrics will be applicable to everyone. Then we standardize on what is a monthly and what is a weekly time frame. So no more 6-day weeks, no more 31-day months. It was hard to compare February to October, which people were doing. And then their question was like, why do we see so much more growth in October than from February? And you were like, there's more days in October. And they were like, oh yeah. So it's a process. We centralized all of our documentation. So there is no more oh, it's in a Notion doc, it's in a GitHub repo, oh, it's in this folder, or let me email it to you, or actually it's on my laptop, let me just Slack it to you real quick. It's all in one place. The data team has to stamp your PR for SQL if you want to get your metric approved, right? We don't want to have any more 6-day weeks. And then we came up with this concept that was, I think, pretty simple, and I think something that a lot of dashboarding companies are doing is they have these templates. One of the philosophies that we use at Vercel is land, learn, and leave with our dashboards. You shouldn't have to go to a dashboard, learn how to use the dashboard, and then consume the content before you can leave. You should already know before you get there like what the topics or the layout or the design should look like. So we like to use land, learn, and leave as our approach. So the other challenge was who is our audience as a data team? Now, depending where you're at is going to determine the audience of the who you serve. When we went to Vercel, we realized there were three types of people. There were people using data, there were people wanting to use data, and there were people who will never use data again because the service was so terrible, right? They were done with it. So stakeholder meetings, we asked people what about data is valuable to you, and what do you want out of data that will help you do your job so you can go home at 5:30. They said metrics. It was just overwhelming metrics. We don't know where we're going. We don't know if our decisions have impact, so it was metrics. So to do that, we decided we had to find all of the data sources that were valuable. This isn't all of them, but the idea is there was more than one, right? It wasn't like we were just going to Salesforce. We had to find all of the data sources that had meaningful impact on our stakeholders, and we said, we will take all data sources and we're going to funnel them into a single table, right? We're going to build a place where we can aggregate all of this information that we can then explode out into many metrics, hence the title of the talk, Dozens of Metrics from One Heterogeneous Table. So as you can see, we have different data sources, and then we come to the right side of the chart. These are like the core attributes about the data. So at Vercel, we have a concept of a user. We have a concept of a team, and teams can have users. And we have projects, which are like web pages, websites, you know. So a user can have a project, or a user can own a project, a team can own a project. Obviously, a user can deploy a team project. So similar like GitHub, how they have like users, orgs, repos, we have projects, right? Action, product, metrics, groups. I'll go into more detail into this in a little bit, but I just want to pause to see if this makes sense. Cool? Yeah.
So nothing exists at a sub-data level.
So we chose date because a lot of our ETL pipelines go at the date. If you're, I don't trade stock. I'm not that smart. Let's just say you were a stock trader and you could do things at the minute level. Maybe yours would be minute, right? But it's all based on the needs of your data. Maybe you don't have a concept of a user team project, or maybe you have an additional concept of maybe you have a user team, maybe you have a business, which a business can have many teams and teams can have users, right? So this is meant to fit the structure of your company, right? Yeah?
That's a good question. Earlier you mentioned you standardized the weekly and the monthly data time frames. How did you do that? Just like drop a day or calculate a per day average?
Yeah, I'm going to get that in a couple of slides, but it's a great question. Super simple and something that people love because it's extremely concrete. So I'm just going to kind of walk through. We call this the metrics enrollment table. It's an on-the-nose name, but it makes sense because we're data people, and I don't know, naming things are hard. Basically, it's a metric, and this is how you enroll in it, right? So hence the metrics enrollment table. It's the funnel full of our metrics. It's like a version-controlled schema. So no one's going to push information to it that can't exist there, which is we don't want our metrics to break. The structure, it forces a usable data pretty far upstream on the engineering side, because the engineering teams know what they need in their data if they want to get it into the metrics layer or our metrics enrollment table. You don't need the data team anymore to add new metrics. You can't push things that can't be pushed here, but you can push things that can be pushed here. Go for it. And then, and the cool part, my favorite part about this talk is that we're going to get into a formula for how to define a metric. So not only do we use the table as kind of like a metrics log, we also use the table as our formula for computing the dozens of metrics from one heterogeneous table. So I have my undergrad in sociology, and one of my teachers said, when you write a paper, you gotta tell them what you're gonna say it, and then tell them what you said. So I'm gonna keep coming back to the title as dozens of metrics, and eventually it's gonna be pass the mic from one heterogeneous table. So these are the time frames. We have 3 time frames at Vercel. Daily. Daily is midnight to 11:59. Not a super used time frame. We use this for basically one use case. If you launched a new product or have a new marketing campaign, you use this time frame in the first week only. Because that's all the data you can have to compare time over time. So your first week, you can use daily. Once you get past the first week, we're putting you on the weekly time frame. Right? So that way you can start comparing weekly. Now, you'll notice on here that the weekly is a 7-day rolling average. So you don't have to wait until Monday to get your next weekly metric. It's just a constant 7-day moving window. And we use the 7 most complete days. Hope that makes sense. Yeah.
So every day you're calculating this new metric and then you're tracking that. So every day you have a new metric, essentially.
Every day you have a new weekly metric. Yep.
Okay.
And it's the past 7 days. So this is great. Yes.
Do you support non-additive metrics or semi-additive metric, count distincts and averages and things like that?
Yeah, I'll get into that a little bit, how the table design. But yeah, that's a great question. And then you'll notice. So this metric is really great for like a new product or a new marketing campaign, like the first month, right? We don't want people relying on weekly-based metrics if your product is like a year old, right? It's too mature to be relying on timeframes that are too small. It's influenced too much by new events. The monthly one is our core timeframe. And that is like the weekly one, a 28-day rolling timeframe. Not 31, not 30, 28 days. Does anyone know why you'd want to go with the 28 days? I can tell you why we did. It gives you a very clean month over month. Yeah, every day is represented 4 times, right? So if you do a 30-day rolling window, the weekend could be represented 5 times, where the weekdays will only be represented 4 times. And if you're like Vercel, where you have less activity on the weekend, your metric's going to tank like every 7 days. Then the data team's going to get asked, why did our metric drop 3%? And you're going to say, because the weekend's in there 5 times. And they're going to say, why is the weekend in there 5 times, right? So we do 28 days. I know it's called monthly, but it's 28 days.
So it's effectively 13 months, but how do you account for the extra day or 2 in the leap year?
It's just always a rolling window, right? So so
you don't always reset back to January 1?
Yep. And you can do it different ways. You can compare that day to the previous year. You compare that day but it's always a 28-day rolling window. And then for our finance teams who are like, we can't do that, they just look at the first day of the month, right? So they care about the last 28 days, but on the first day of the month for like their numbers. Sorry.
So did the accountants use like trailing 12 months for like annualizing stuff?
Well, so one of the metrics I'm pushing for, which we haven't kind of solidified yet, are like quarterly, last 90 days, and like yearly, right? But we're working on different versions of this. It's a process.
And did anyone push back and ask for stuff last month to be metric?
They do, and I'll get into that in a second with this table. It's a great question. So, like I said before, we aggregate all of our data sources into this one table. This is a fake data I made up. This is mostly the structure we use, and I'm going to walk you all through the structure a little bit. And as you can see, each record is in here with a timestamp. So, back to this question, like to date month, you could calculate to date month off of this table as well for your bespoke metrics. But what's nice is they can still follow the similar pattern, which we'll get into later. So, these are all of our ID columns, right? As I said before, users, teams, projects, blah, blah. Actions is we're going to come to find out to be really useful, is what a user is like engaging with the product. It's like this is the thing they're like doing. The product is, like it sounds, the product area the user is engaging with. So we have these 2 core products. We have where you can deploy on Vercel, where you're deploying your data. And then you have preview comments where for your preview domains you can like go in and be like, hey, we should change this color. we should do this thing, right? So this is the different product areas. Then we have the metric group, which is like active user, right? And you can see how you can append on that daily, weekly, monthly active user. So we're starting to see how we can make one row into many metrics, over time. The source column is really great for me because I get asked the question, well, why did our data change, right? At Vercel, I pinned the source column to a file in GitHub. Say, this file generated this line of metric. So that way, if the thing drops or increases 5%, I'm like, who merged a PR that changed this code? Right? I can trace this all the way back to like a get user who might have merged code. A column we don't use very frequently is the number of events. Because it's an aggregated time to a time frame, you could use the number of events. One of my iterations for next year, or maybe further down the line, would be using this to identify our super users, right? Users who are doing something like many, 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 many times in a day. So you could kind of develop this concept of like a super user metric. And then finally, you just have your timestamp. Let's jump into the formula. So I think this is my favorite slide. If this doesn't resonate with you all, I'm sorry. I was very excited about this slide. I had like 20 different colors on here for how excited I was. My wife was like, Thomas, you can't have 20 colors on a slide. Like, you're going to lose everybody. And I was like, but it's great. So as you can see, this is the formula for developing your metric, right? You don't need every single one of these inputs for every single metric, but the idea is you can use a combination of these to develop your metric. So I will show you that later. Remember this. We'll also come back to it. And I just put entity IDs to represent the many entity IDs you could have. So this is one line from that data set, and this is how many metrics we're going to generate, and I will walk you through those metrics. So this is my line. So this is a top-level company metric, a monthly active user. All I care about is their user ID, the time frame, and the fact that they were in a metric group called active user. Right? We could have called this weekly active user or daily active user. The next one is monthly active team member, by checking to see if there was a team ID and a user ID, and they were in an active user. I'm now able to develop a monthly active team member metric. I can do the same with teams, checking for a team ID. Is this resonating? Okay, cool. I'm going to skip these two for now and go to the bottom. We care about projects, so if the project ID is there, and under the active, under the metric group of active, you get the monthly active projects, monthly active team project, the project ID and the team ID. So it's kind of hopefully making sense. Now, what's really nice about this is you can start thinking about how can I build a metric, not to steal Abby's talk about the metric tree. His metric tree was great. Mine's more of like a product metrics tree. You can start building this like metric tree now, right? So you can add in the action to this, and you can start getting something like a monthly active developer, which is now a subset of monthly active user. So you can start breaking these things apart and seeing how the sub-metrics feed the parent metric. So you could, if we have time, I have a couple slides post the question if I haven't run out of time to talk about how you could break that down by country. You could break that down by age of the customer. You could break that down by billing plan. So you can really get super granular with these metrics that kind of all roll up. I'm going to show you the next slide. You'll notice that the first 3 rows and the bottom 2 rows are the exact same metric. The only thing that really changed was the action the user did. They had a preview comment. So they're not going to be a monthly active developer. They're a monthly active commenter. So so these 2 metrics feed to the monthly active user. And one of the nice things data analysts can do with that is you're like, wow, we've seen a huge spike in our monthly active contributors, and we've also seen a spike in our monthly active users. Oh, it came from these people using this feature, right? So now the product people can say, oh yeah, our new product has kind of bumped monthly active users. Or you can say, we've seen a huge spike in monthly active commenters, but it didn't change the monthly active users. It's because when we're doing our distinct count of users for monthly active users, people who are commenting are also deploying. So it's like the same people are using both features. So it allows the analyst to get an understanding of like how much breadth and width there are to feature adoption, and then how much each one of these is influencing the overall metric. So then this isn't exactly true because you could do weekly or daily. It's also okay for one line to map to one metric. Like you don't have to get 30 metrics or whatever per line of code. So you can just do one line per metric. So I'm going to go back over the formula real quick. Like I said, this is the exciting thing for me. I apologize if it's not that exciting. I think this is like really great. Your time frame determines your daily, weekly, monthly. Your entity IDs or a combination of your entity IDs can determine, is it a user, is it a team, is it a project, is it a team project, is it a team member? That determines that level of metric. And then you can use the actions to kind of build out this hierarchy, this like tree of metrics. You can group some actions together. Maybe it makes sense to group 2 or 3 actions together into an actions group, and you can dissect those even more. Along with product, right? Product managers might not care about the company level metrics. So on the company dashboard, they can just filter for their product, and they get all their metrics sliced the exact same way, defined the exact same way everyone else's metric is defined, and they can see what they look like. Now it allows product managers to compare their metric against other product managers. Metric group, like I said, that's just like the general group your events falling into. And then finally, a combination of all of those things determines the metric. So this is just revisiting the table again. So this is like my first stopping point for the questions. If we don't have any more time, I won't go on, but I have a couple slides after if we can. But basically, when we started at Vercel, there was no data ownership, which we have now because we can track metrics back to a file on GitHub that sent the data. The SQL logic was all over the place, not centralized, no documentation. That's no longer the case. We have metric definitions. They're in our metadata tool. We have dashboards built specifically for these metrics. We know who our audience is. That's huge, right? We now know who to build metrics for. We've aggregated all this into one source table. So every metric can be traced back through the lineage, back to that metrics enrollment table. We're no longer answering the question of, did something change? How is this computed? Where is this computed? When is this computed? It's like it all just follows one line back. We have standardized timeframes, daily, weekly, monthly, and we have definitions of when you actually use those timeframes. People like I said, we're using the 6-day weekly metric when their product was like 3 years old, right? Like, and so their product managers were like, did this drop because of a holiday? Did it shift because no one's using it anymore? The timeframes were too small and were too influenced by time. And if we have time, I'll talk about how we can add segments and the importance of data ownership. I want to pause here because I'm about at a half an hour, and that's what I was told, for more questions.